Michael Douglas had been married to one of the most beautiful women alive for nearly a quarter century. He had stood beside her at the Oscars and on red carpets and at the bedsides of sick children and through the particular hell of his own cancer treatment. And what he finally admitted at 80 was that he had become the reason she was unhappy, not through cruelty, not through betrayal, through something slower and more inevitable and in some ways worse than either of those things. He had gotten old, and she had not, and the gap between those two facts had grown into something neither of them knew how to close. Michael Douglas was 54 years old when he first saw Catherine Zeta-Jones on a movie screen. He was recovering from back surgery, trying to climb out of habits and addictions that had quietly shaped the previous decade of his life, carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who had accomplished everything the industry said to want and still could not locate his own peace. He had been through a divorce. He had survived the tabloid machinery that treated his personal life as public property. He was the son of Kirk Douglas, which meant he had spent his entire life operating in the shadow of a legend while simultaneously being expected to become one himself. He knew success. Inner peace was another matter. The Kirk Douglas shadow is worth understanding on its own terms because it shaped Michael Douglas in ways that are still visible at 80 if you know what you are looking at. Kirk was one of the defining screen presences of the 20th century. The jaw and the intensity and the roles that were essentially case studies in masculine ambition, straining against its own limits. Michael grew up watching the world respond to his father as a force of nature and understanding. From the inside of that experience rather than from the outside, where it looks like privilege that being the son of a force of nature is its own particular kind of difficult. You inherit the name and the comparisons and the expectations, but not the specific qualities that generated them. Those you have to find yourself, which Michael Douglas did, producing in his late 30s and early 40s a run of work that owed nothing to his father's filmography. Wall Street, Fatal Attraction, Basic Instinct. The films of that period did not ask whether he was as good as Kirk. They established that he was entirely his own thing. But the shadow does not disappear entirely just because you have demonstrated you can operate outside of it. It stays. It waits for moments of vulnerability which illness and aging provide in abundance. He saw her in The Mask of Zorro, and something shifted. She was 29. She was radiant in the specific way of someone who does not yet know what they are fully capable of and is in the process of finding out. She was everything he feared he was no longer. When he met her in person at the Deauville Film Festival in France later that year, he carried into the room a combination of charm and the kind of insecurity that charm is always trying to cover. He told her with the confidence of a man who had learned that boldness sometimes works that he would be the father of her children. The line was meant to be memorable. It was. She looked at him with the cool patience of a woman who had been approached by men of consequence before, and found the approach itself unimpressive, and she dismissed him politely and completely, and left him with a particular sting of humiliation that he later admitted he had not felt in years. She was not a woman he could impress with status or bend with bravado. That realization did not discourage him. It made the pursuit more serious. When Catherine left to film Entrapment in Scotland, Michael sent roses to her hotel. She kept the card from that bouquet for more than 20 years. That is the detail that matters. Not the roses, which are easy, but the card kept for 2 decades, which is the kind of preservation that belongs to things a person recognizes as turning points only after enough time has passed. By December 1999, they were engaged. In August 2000, their son Dylan was born. That November, they stood together in the Plaza Hotel in New York, surrounded by Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg and Anthony Hopkins and the full weight of Hollywood royalty, and exchanged vows while their infant son was carried down the aisle. Catherine wore a David Emanuel gown. The world saw glamour and destiny, and the confirmation that love stories still happened even for men in their mid-50s who had already made all their mistakes. What the world did not see was the quiet anxiety that was already forming at the edges of what Michael allowed himself to feel. Catherine's career exploded. She won an Academy Award in 2003 for Chicago while pregnant with their daughter Karis. She was ascending at the precise moment that Michael was becoming increasingly aware that he had already peaked. He felt pride. He also felt the first early tremors of a fear that would only deepen with time. The fear that he was becoming a man who was too old, too tired, too diminished for the woman he had chosen, and who had against the odds chosen him back. He tried not to show it. He had spent his entire career learning to project competence and control, and he brought those skills into the marriage the way actors bring their instruments into every room they enter. But by 2010, the projections were becoming harder to sustain. She was 41. He was 66. She was at the height of everything, and he was carrying decades of surgeries, addictions, stress, and the particular weight of a body that had absorbed considerable punishment and was beginning to present the bill. Then came the diagnosis. Stage 4, throat cancer with the tumor at the base of his tongue. His doctors told him quietly, and he sat with the information for a moment before he understood what it meant, which was not primarily that he might die, though he might, but that Catherine was now married to a man who might die, which was a different kind of burden. The kind that belongs to the person standing beside the bed rather than lying in it. The chemotherapy and radiation were, by his own later account, brutal in ways he had not anticipated. He lost weight rapidly. He had difficulty eating, difficulty speaking, difficulty breathing in the easy, unconscious way that breathing is supposed to work. He became, in a matter of months, physically unrecognizable from the man he had been. Catherine did not leave. She slept in chairs beside him in hospital rooms. She held his hand through the nausea. She learned to read the particular quality of his silences, so that she could tell the difference between pain and exhaustion, and the specific despair of a man who is wondering whether the strength he needs is actually there. She stayed composed in the rooms where composure was required, and she went to the bathroom to cry when it was not, because she understood that her breaking down visibly would cost him something he could not afford. The world called her devoted. The world did not see what devotion at that level actually costs. When Michael entered remission in early 2011 and stood on national television to announce that the cancer was gone, the public celebrated. Catherine collapsed. Not publicly, not dramatically, but in the way that happens when a person has held themselves together through an extended emergency, and the emergency finally ends and there is suddenly nothing left to hold on to. She entered treatment for bipolar II disorder, a condition she had managed in private for years, in the spring of 2011. The diagnosis was not a surprise to people close to her. The timing made sense to anyone who understood what the previous 18 months had required of her. She had given everything she had to keeping him alive and their family functional, and when the crisis lifted, what remained was not relief, but fracture. Michael understood during his own recovery that his illness had taken something from Catherine that was not coming back in any simple or predictable way. He had survived. She had survived the surviving of him. Those are not the same experience, and they do not produce the same aftermath, and the marriage that emerged from his remission was not the same marriage that had existed before the diagnosis. Both of them knew it. Neither of them said it directly for another year. The years between this remission and the separation were not empty. They were filled with the particular work of two people trying to return to a version of themselves that the previous 18 months had substantially altered. Michael went back to acting with the methodical determination of someone who understood that inactivity would cost him more than failure. He appeared in Behind the Candelabra in 2013, playing Liberace with a commitment so complete that Steven Soderbergh later said it was the best work Walken had ever done, which he corrected, meaning Michael. The role required vanity and vulnerability and a specific understanding of a man who performed his true self so elaborately that the performance eventually became the truth. It earned him a Golden Globe and an Emmy. It also reminded the industry, and possibly himself, that the cancer had not taken his ability to disappear into a character. That was still intact. Some things illness does not reach. Catherine, in those same years, was doing her own version of the same repair. She had spoken publicly about her bipolar II disorder with a candor that changed the conversation around mental health in Hollywood in the specific way that a famous person's honesty changes conversations by giving people permission to use words they had previously found too frightening. She returned to the stage. She took on work that interested her. She rebuilt methodically and with considerable discipline the parts of her professional identity that the years of caregiving had allowed to recede. They were during those years both in recovery, just not from the same thing. By 2013, the emotional distance between them had become a physical one. In August of that year, after nearly 13 years of marriage, they separated. There was no single catastrophic argument, no discovered infidelity, no public eruption. Just two people who had been through too much together and had arrived separately at the same exhausted conclusion that they needed to stop for a while and assess what was left. Catherine left with the children. Michael remained in New York, alone in a way he had not been in over a decade. He returned to the Deauville Film Festival shortly after the announcement, the precise location where he had first met her 15 years earlier, and people who saw him there said he looked like a man who understood the symmetry of that and found it more painful than poetic. They reconciled by 2014 in the careful, provisional way of people who have decided that the life they built together is worth another attempt, even knowing that the attempt will require them to be more careful and more deliberate than love usually feels. Michael later admitted that they came back to each other as different people shaped and in some ways permanently altered by everything that had happened between the moment of separation and the moment of return. The marriage survived. It survived in the way that things survive when the people responsible for them are determined and serious and not willing to let go easily. It did not immediately thrive. What followed was years of effort of public anniversaries and careful interviews, and the practiced performance of a couple who understood that their marriage existed partly in public space and required management at that level. They posted tributes on significant dates. They appeared together at events where appearing together communicated something the world wanted to see communicated. And inside all of that, the private reality continued to be more complicated than the photographs suggested. In 2018, they celebrated their 18th anniversary with a public renewal of vows in Mallorca, photographs released, showing them laughing, dressed well visibly, still capable of the kind of affection that reads as genuine from a distance. Whether it was genuine from up close is a question neither of them has answered directly. What is clear is that they understood by that point the difference between a marriage and the performance of one, and they had decided that maintaining both simultaneously was worth the effort it required. That decision reflects something about character that even the people who find it difficult to admire can recognize as serious. Michael aged faster after the cancer. By the early 2020s, people who had followed his career for decades noticed in his public appearances that he was slower, that he moved with more care, that the physical confidence that had been one of his defining qualities was now something he was managing rather than expressing. Catherine, still in her early 50s, still magnetic, still in possession of the specific energy of someone who has more they want to do and the capability to do it, found herself once again in the role she had occupied during his cancer treatment, the role of the person who adjusts her own rhythm to accommodate the diminished rhythm of someone she loves. She wanted to work. She wanted to travel. She wanted to inhabit the decade she was in with the full attention it deserved. Michael could not keep pace, and he knew it, and the knowledge sat in him like something he could not remove and could not ignore. He told a friend with the flat directness of a man who had stopped dressing things up that he had become her responsibility. Not her partner. Her responsibility. The distinction matters enormously to a man who had spent his entire adult life being competent and capable and above all present in the specific way that presence is supposed to work in a marriage. He had become without wanting to become it, and without any moment where the change was visible as it happened. Someone who needed to be managed. There is a specific loneliness in that position that has nothing to do with being alone. You are surrounded by love, and by people who are doing everything in their power to make the situation livable. and the loneliness is precisely the awareness that you have become the situation. That horror, not the horror of illness or failure or public humiliation, but the horror of understanding that the person you love is slowly losing herself in the process of caring for you and that you cannot change, that was what Michael Douglas finally allowed himself to say out loud at 80. The guilt he described was specific and accumulated over years. Guilty for the 25-year age difference that had shaped every chapter of their relationship from the beginning. Guilty that his cancer had consumed years of her life that she had not planned to spend that way. Guilty that her career, which had been ascending at the moment they married, had been paused and reshaped around the demands of his health and their family. Guilty that Catherine Zeta-Jones, a woman of extraordinary talent and ambition and fire, had been reduced too often and for too long to a caretaker. He had loved her with everything he had, and he had still, through no act of malice, but through the simple fact of being older and getting older, been the cause of her unhappiness. That is the kind of truth that does not offer any exit. You cannot apologize your way out of it. You cannot fix it. You can only finally say it. What remains between them now is a question that even the people closest to them answer differently depending on the day they are asked. They still appear together. They still speak about each other with what sounds like genuine feeling. They have children and decades of shared history and the particular bond that forms between people who have been through actual emergencies together, rather than just the sustained ordinariness of a long marriage. Whether that is enough, whether love that has carried this much weight can still function as love rather than as obligation, is the question Michael Douglas finally admitted he does not know the answer to. He stopped pretending he did. That at 80 is the most honest thing he has said in years. Do you think a marriage can survive this kind of weight, or is there a point where survival and love are no longer the same thing? Let us know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you in the next one.